Hi, this is Matt Baker. So far on this channel, we've done videos about Christian denominations, Jewish denominations, and Muslim denominations. Well, today we're going to branch out beyond the Abrahamic religions and take a look at Hindu denominations. Now, the first thing I want to do is remind you that I'm using the word denomination very loosely in these videos. You see, the word denomination really only works within a Christian context. So you have to understand that when I use it to talk about a non Christian religion, like Judaism, Islam, or Hinduism, the analogy is not perfect. So basically, whenever I say denomination, know that I simply mean a branch or subgroup within a larger religion. Now, when it comes to Hinduism, even the word religion itself is problematic because it can definitely be argued that Hinduism is not actually a single religion, but rather a cluster of religions, grouped together simply because of their connection to India. In fact, Hindus themselves don't refer to Hinduism as a religion. They call it a dharma, which means something closer to a cosmic order or set of divine laws. This is why Hinduism is often categorized as one of the dharmic religions, together with Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, and Sikhism, all of which originated on the Indian subcontinent. Now, the one thing, and this is often the only thing, that most non Hindus know about Hinduism is that it has a lot of gods. So, another thing I want to clear up from the start is that this does not necessarily mean that all Hindus are polytheists, meaning people who worship many gods. In fact, a lot of Hindus are actually monotheists, meaning that they believe that all gods are aspects of one god. Others are something closer to henotheists, meaning that they have one god that they worship as a supreme god, but they also acknowledge the existence of lesser gods. To make things even more complicated, many Hindus are more accurately pantheists, meaning that they believe that God and the universe are one and the same. And then finally, there are also some Hindus who are actually atheists, meaning that they don't believe in gods at all, and instead approach Hinduism from a strictly philosophical perspective. However, with that said, I do want to introduce you to some of the main gods within Hinduism, because this will help you later when I discuss Hindu denominations. It is often said that modern Hinduism has three main gods. These are Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva, often labeled as the creator, the preserver, and the destroyer, although not all Hindus view them this way. Sometimes these three gods are even referred to as the Hindu Trinity, although the more appropriate word is the Trimurti. Brahma should not be confused with Brahman. Brahman, with the N on the end, refers to the concept of an ultimate reality, which is equated with the totality of the universe. In contrast, Brahma is a distinct god. In fact, a male god who is credited with having created the physical world and with being the father of many other gods. Strangely, though, Brahma is not a god who is regularly worshipped in India today, and in fact, there are very few temples that are dedicated to him specifically. The easiest way to recognize him is that he is usually depicted as having four heads. Vishnu and Shiva are much more popular. Vishnu is usually depicted with multiple arms, a blue complexion, and one hand holding a shell. You'll also usually see him sitting on a giant, multi-headed snake. And note that I said him. Vishnu, like all three of these main gods, is male. He's also well known for having been incarnated many times on Earth, his two most popular incarnations being Krishna and Rama. Shiva can be distinguished from Vishnu because he has a more wild appearance, matted hair, and clothes made from animal skin. Also, he's almost always carrying a trident. Now, each of the three main Hindu gods also has a female consort, or wife. Saraswati pairs with Brahma, Lakshmi pairs with Vishnu, and Parvati pairs with Shiva. If you see a goddess sitting on a white lotus flower playing a stringed instrument near a peacock, that's Saraswati. And if you see a goddess sitting on a red lotus near elephants with coins somehow being poured out, that's Lakshmi. Otherwise, it's probably Pavarti, or one of Pavarti's many alternative forms, such as Durga or Kali. Another popular god in Hinduism is Ganesh. He's easily recognizable because he's the one with the elephant head. He fits on the family tree as the son of Shiva and Pavarti. Finally, let me introduce the Hindu gods for the sun and the moon, Surya and Chandra. Now you know why the Indian space missions to the moon are called Chandrayaan, Yan meaning vehicle. There are, of course, many more Hindu gods beyond these ones, but I'm going to stop there for now. Next, I want to introduce you to the main Hindu scriptures, or holy writings. Unlike Christians who have the Bible and Muslims who have the Quran, there is no single book within Hinduism that is directly comparable to these two. Just like Hinduism has many gods, it also has many scriptures. These are divided into two categories: Shruti, meaning that which is heard, and Smriti, meaning that which is remembered. Shruti is considered more authoritative, and it consists of the four Vedas: the Rig Veda, which is the oldest, followed by the Yajur Veda and Samaveda, and finally the Atharveda, which is the most recent. In turn, each Veda also has four parts, or layers. The oldest layers are the Samhitas, which are kind of like hymns or prayers. Next, there are the Aranyakas, which are instructions about rituals and ceremonies, and then the Brahmanas, which are commentaries on those instructions. Finally, there are the Upanishads, which, keep in mind, were added last. These are more philosophical and represent Hinduism's transition from a mere system of ancient rituals to what we today consider to be a fully fledged religion. Smriti consists of an even larger collection of writings. I'm going to mention just three. First, there are the Mahabharata and Ramayana, two epic poems that are sort of like the Iliad, but much, much longer. One small section of the Mahabharata is known as the Bhagavad Gita, which is often the only set of Hindu scriptures that most Westerners are familiar with. Previously, I did a whole video on the Mahabharata and the family tree of its characters. So if you want to learn more about that, I'll leave a link to it in the description. Finally, included in the Smriti are the Puranas, a large collection of stories and encyclopedic information that cover everything from the genealogy of the gods to the history of royal dynasties. Okay, so now that you have some background on the Hindu gods and Hindu scriptures, let me now talk about how the religion we call Hinduism developed. Like I did in the Christian series, I'm going to offer you two scenarios: the one that is told by those who take the Hindu scriptures literally, and the one that is told by secular academics. According to the traditional Hindu view, the people living in India today are the direct descendants of the people who were living there 10,000 years ago. And throughout that entire time, the Hindu religion has pretty much been the same. In fact, one view within Hinduism is that history is cyclical and made up of 4 ages, with each one being worse than the one before. Once the 4 ages are completed, the whole process repeats itself. Currently, we are in the 4th age, which started around 3100 BCE, around the time of the Mahabharata War. According to the traditional Hindu view, the most important scriptures, the Vedas, are authorless and were revealed to certain sages before this through intense meditation. However, near the end of the 3rd age, a sage named Vyasa compiled them in the form that we have them in today, in addition to writing the Mahabharata and the Puranas. Now, as you might have guessed, the secular view of how Hinduism developed is quite different. According to the academic consensus, what we call Hinduism today evolved slowly over time and has its roots in at least 3 different places. One of these is the Indus Valley Civilization, which is one of the 3 oldest civilizations on Earth, the other 2 being Egypt and Sumer. However, unlike with ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs and Sumerian cuneiform, we cannot read the writing left behind by the Indus Valley civilization, and hence we cannot know for sure what their religion was and how it might be connected to Hinduism. There are some tantalizing hints, though, such as this Indus Valley seal, which shows a figure who shares certain attributes in common with the Hindu god Shiva. Then there are local folk religions that likely developed throughout the Indian subcontinent, each with their own local god. To this day, there are rural villages in India that still follow a kind of folk Hinduism that combines certain Hindu practices with the worship of a local god who actually predates Hinduism. Finally, there's Proto-Indo-European religion, the same religion that gave birth to the pantheon of gods worshipped by the Greeks, Romans, and Germanic tribes. For example, the main gods worshipped by the Proto-Indo-Europeans include a sky father named Deus, a young goddess of the dawn named Hausos, and a set of twins associated with horses. In Greece, Deus became known as Zeus, and in many European languages today, the word for God is still something like Dieu or Dios. There's also a Greek goddess of the dawn named Eos, and a pair of twins in Anglo-Saxon legend named Hengist and Horsa. What about in India, though? Well, what do you know? In the Rig Veda, which remember is the oldest set of scriptures in Hinduism, it too mentions a sky father deity named Dyaus. And it also has a goddess of the dawn called Ushas, and a set of twins called the Ashvins, Ashvin being the Sanskrit word for horseman. But don't get me wrong, I am not saying that I agree with the now debunked Aryan invasion theory. That theory, which clearly had racist overtones, claimed that lighter-skinned Indo-Europeans called Aryans conquered the earlier darker-skinned inhabitants of India in some sort of dramatic fashion, causing the sudden demise of the Indus Valley civilization. Instead, the academic consensus today is that there was a very slow migration of Indo-Europeans into India between the years 2000 and 1500 BCE, and that these people likely intermixed with the local populations, resulting in the creation of the Vedic civilization. This new hypothesis is backed up by both linguistic evidence and DNA evidence. Now, as you probably guessed, the Vedic civilization is so named because it produced the Hindu scriptures called the Vedas. But keep in mind that the Vedic religion was not the same thing as modern Hinduism. For example, the main gods talked about in the Vedas are not Vishnu and Shiva. Rather, they are Indra, Varuna, and Agni. So, although it's often said that Hinduism is the world's oldest religion, dating back 4,000 plus years, this is not exactly true. The roots of Hinduism and some of its customs do go back that far, but Hinduism as we know it today does not. The same is true for Judaism. Judaism has its roots in ancient Israelite religion, which originated around 3,000 years ago. However, Judaism as we know it today is not identical to the religion practiced by the ancient Israelites. It developed mostly between the years 600 BCE and 200 CE. So my point is, dating religions is not as simple as you might think, because religions change over time, and this is certainly true of Hinduism. The Vedic religion eventually evolved into Brahmanism, by which point the priestly caste known as the Brahmins was firmly established. But Brahmanism was by no means the only religion in India at this point. It was mainly practiced in the kingdom of Kuru. Further east, the Shramana movement was taking hold. Shramana meaning seeker. Shramanas rejected the authority of the Vedas, as well as the Brahmins, and instead promoted rigid self-discipline and the rejection of worldly pleasures. It was out of the Shramana movement that the religions of Buddhism and Jainism developed. However, it also had a big impact on the development of Hinduism, leading to what's been called the Hindu synthesis, which occurred over the period from around 500 BCE and 500 CE, which is when many religious ideas and customs came together to form what we know as Hinduism today. It was during this period that the Mahabharata, Ramayana, and Puranas were written, and it was after this period that Indian religious views could now be divided into clear categories called Astika and Nastika. Astika schools of thought are considered orthodox by Hindus because they all accept the authority of the Vedas. The 6 Astika, or schools of Hinduism, are Jnana, Vaisheshika, Samkhya, Yoga, Mimamsa, and Vedanta. However, keep in mind that these are not denominations. They are more like philosophies that people within different Hindu denominations can follow. In contrast to the Astika schools, the Nastika schools reject the Vedas and are therefore considered heterodox by Hindus. These include the religions of Buddhism and Jainism, but also several lesser-known schools of thought. Now, if you're a Westerner, out of the 6 Astika, there's probably one that you recognize: yoga. Well, the first thing you need to know about yoga is that it is not simply a series of exercises, which is what most Westerners think yoga is. Yoga is actually a complete system of philosophy, and in fact, it's one of the more popular systems of Hindu philosophy. As you probably know, most Hindus believe in reincarnation and that we are stuck in a seemingly endless cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. The goal of Hinduism is therefore to achieve moksha, which is the release from the cycle. Well, yoga posits that there are actually 4 different religious paths that a person can follow to achieve moksha. The first is karma yoga, which basically involves working hard, doing good, and serving others. Then there's bhakti yoga, which involves showing love and devotion towards a particular god. Finally, there's jnana yoga, which involves pursuing knowledge, and Raja Yoga, which involves meditation. But again, these 4 paths do not represent 4 different denominations. Hindus from various denominations may follow one or more of these paths. If there's anything akin to denominations within Hinduism, we could place them under Bhakti Yoga, because the most common way that Hindus can be divided into various subgroups is by which god or gods they are particularly devoted to. This is why it is often said that Hinduism has 4 main denominations: Vaishnavism, Shaivism, Shaktism, and Smartism. Let's look at Vaishnavism first, because it's the largest denomination, representing around 70% of all Hindus. Vaishnavists worship the god Vishnu as the supreme deity. This includes his various incarnated forms, called avatars, which is when he was born on Earth as a human or animal. His 2 most popular avatars are Rama and Krishna. Now, as I mentioned earlier, Vishnu was not actually one of the main Vedic gods, although he is mentioned a few times in the Rig Veda. However, over time, he took on the attributes and legends of other gods and became more and more important. For example, one group of ancient Indians worshipped a god named Vasudeva. This god was eventually merged with another god named Krishna, who was worshipped by a different group of people. But then, still later, Vasudeva Krishna merged with Vishnu and was understood to be just one of Vishnu's 10 main incarnations. Now, lest you think that this is strange, let me point out that 2 or more gods merging into one is actually a pretty common thing throughout the history of religion. For instance, in Canaan, there was originally a god named El, who was separate from the god represented by the letters YHWH. But then eventually, over time, these 2 gods merged and were seen as being one and the same, which explains why, to this day, the Bible sometimes calls God El or Elohim, and then other times calls him YHWH. The second largest Hindu denomination is Shaivism, found mostly in South India and followed by around 25% of all Hindus. Shaivists worship the god Shiva as the supreme deity. Unlike Vishnu, Shiva is not mentioned in the Rig Veda at all. However, the Rig Veda does mention a god named Rudra, who is very similar to Shiva and is thus strongly associated with him. Another thing that makes Shaivism different from Vaishnavism is that Shiva is often worshipped in a non-human form, being displayed in many temples as a simple stone called a lingam. Many people assume that the lingam is supposed to represent a male phallus, but this is actually not true. It's simply meant to communicate the idea that Shiva has no real form. The remaining 5% of Hindus follow either Shaktism or Smartism. Shaktism is closely related to Shaivism, but whereas Shaivists worship the supreme deity in the form of the male god Shiva, Shaktists worship the supreme deity in the form of the female goddess Shakti, which is another name for Parvati, Shiva's wife. Like I mentioned earlier, this supreme goddess takes many forms. Sometimes she's the sweet and loving Parvati, but other times she's the warrior goddess Durga, or even the scary-looking Kali. Finally, there's the Hindu denomination known as Smartism, in which 5 gods are worshipped equally: Ganesh, Shiva, Shakti, Vishnu, and Surya. Note that the word Smartism is based on the word Smriti, which we came across earlier, and which refers to the body of Hindu scriptures that came after the Vedas. Now, as a whole, Hinduism is the world's 3rd largest religion, with around 1.1 billion followers. However, unlike the other 2 big religions, Christianity and Islam, Hinduism is mostly limited to just one area of the world, South Asia. And whenever you do find Hinduism being practiced outside of South Asia, it's almost always among people of South Asian descent. The one exception to this is the many neo-Hindu movements that have sprung up in Western countries since the middle of the 20th century. Most of these are founded by individual gurus or teachers, many of whom were or are quite controversial. It would take a whole other video to go through all of them, so let me just point out 2. The first is Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. He founded the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, better known as the Hare Krishnas, because they are known for chanting that phrase over and over, as well as Hare Rama. The word Hare is another name for Vishnu, and as we learned earlier, both Krishna and Rama are avatars of Vishnu. So it won't surprise you when I tell you that Hare Krishnas follow a type of Vaishnavism. However, their type of Vaishnavism traces its roots back to Gaudiya Vaishnavism, which started around the year 1500 and which focuses on Krishna as the supreme deity. Swami Prabhupada was himself a controversial figure, known for making racist, anti-Semitic, sexist, and classist comments. And the controversies continued after his death, with ISKCON leaders eventually admitting that physical and sexual abuse was taking place within their organization. They have since taken steps to rebuild their reputation and hopefully better protect children. The other guru I want to mention is Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, who many people know of simply because of his association with the Beatles. More importantly, though, he's the founder of Transcendental Meditation Movement. Although marketed as a non-religious method, it has its roots in meditation techniques that have been practiced within Hinduism for centuries. Okay, so that was a look at Hinduism, as well as the main Hindu denominations. If you haven't yet seen our videos on Christian, Jewish, and Muslim denominations, I'll leave a link to those in the description. Thanks for watching.